Set blasters on full.
What's up, guys? I know it's been a little while, just on a little bit of a break while I was waiting for my pre-orders to come in, and the first batch has finally arrived. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. Today we're going to check out the SH Figuarts Mace Windu figure from their Star Wars line. And as usual, we will start off by checking out the packaging. And this figure uses the usual Star Wars packaging. You have the big window up front with all the logos and everything. You got the action figure and the accessories behind that. On the side of the box, you have a close-up of the figure itself. And on the back, you've got some more close-ups and an action shot or two. And the rest of the box is your usual Figuarts Star Wars packaging. So let's crack it open and check out the accessories first. And this figure does come with the signature purple lightsaber from Mace Windu. The beam on it is pretty nice and straight, nice translucent purple plastic. The handle on it is also really well sculpted. The paint on it is a little bit sloppier than I'm used to with Figuarts. I do like the colors they chose. One issue I found is the beam does have a tendency to fall out of the handle. You do get a second lightsaber with Mace Windu, and this is just the handle. This is for sticking into the belt. You can see the peg right there. The sculpt and paint on this are pretty much the same as the other one. They are pretty good, but I do still feel it's a little bit sloppy for Figuarts. And now to, in my opinion, the best part of the figure, which is the head. You do get two heads, a slightly happy and a slightly perturbed Samuel L. Jackson. And that's really my only gripe with these. There really just isn't a lot of variety in expression. But other than that, the sculpt itself is really well done. You have all these nice bumps and creases and almost looks like vein lines in certain areas. I think it's really well done, very accurate. The paint, or more precisely print on this, is also really well done. All the facial features came out really good on this. The eyes, the lips, the eyebrows. I think they all look really good. I just wish there was a little bit more shading on the rest of the head. And that leaves us with the hands. You do get 3 different sets of hands with this figure, and as usual with Figuarts, the hands are really well sculpted. I do have a little bit of an issue with this hand. It's really the only one, but I don't know how well that shows up on video, but you can see it's a really weird texture. Almost looks like there was a molding issue with it. Everything else with the hands came out great. I do like the shading they added on the knuckles. And again, the sculpt on them is really well done. And you also get a set of open hands, so you can do a force push. And these are also well sculpted, nice tendon and palm details. There's also some shading around the knuckle area. I do wish they had a little bit more shading in other parts of the hand, but that's my only complaint and not a big one. And no Jedi is complete without lightsaber holding hands. You get a left and a right. These did have some molding issues though. You can see all the lines here on the top of the hand, and that did affect left and right hands, which is unfortunate. Paint is the same as the rest of the hands. You get some shading there on the knuckles, but that's about it. So now check out the figure itself, and as always, we'll start off with the sculpt and paint. And overall, I think Figuarts did a really good job with this, but there are definitely some areas of concern here, especially when compared to the Obi-Wan figure that was released not too long ago. And of course, there's going to be a lot of similarities between the two figures, considering they're both from the same time period of Jedi and have similar garb. But some of the things I think were just done much better on the Obi-Wan figure, and I'll get to those in a little bit more detail later on. So now we'll take a closer look at the figure itself, and as always, Figuarts does a really good job of incorporating textures into their sculpts. You can see it all around the robe here, and I do like the varying degrees. It's much smoother on the sleeves and a lot thicker in certain areas of the robe, and overall it's a great additional detail that they've added to the sculpt of the robe. There's also a lot of nice little folds and wrinkles that are added into the sculpt of the robe, and you can see it all over here on the skirt, as well as going up the robe. You can see how there's different ripples and areas on here. The undershirt is also nicely sculpted and painted. There's really no issues there. And the neck is pretty well sculpted. Could use a little bit more shading on it and maybe a little bit thicker, but really no issues. Sleeves came out pretty good. Again, a lot of nice little wrinkles and folds in there. They do have a really nice kind of lived-in look to them. And the belt on this figure did come out pretty good. There are some nice details as far as the sculpt goes. Paint on here, I do like the colors. I do wish they added some shading though. Everything's just that one primary color, and there's no like black wash or anything to give it some texture. But again, it is pretty well detailed as far as sculpt goes. The silver and gold accents on the belt did come out pretty good. Those are cleanly painted and good colors were chosen. And the skirt is a soft plastic and it's very pliable. You can get some good movement out of that, so it really won't hinder the legs when you're posing the figure at all. And I do like the additional layers that they have on here when you compare it to the Obi-Wan. I feel like the Obi-Wan was just a few flaps, and they really added the number of flaps on here, and I think it looks really good. You can see the legs are pretty nicely sculpted. There's a lot of nice wrinkles and folds on those as well. But again, it's a very flat color. There's really no shading or anything to kind of give it a lived-in look. You can see there's a little bit of underpaint here. It looks like it was the same color as the boots and they just didn't apply quite enough white to it. Not sure if that's the case or not. Boots themselves came out good. I think there's really good quality as far as the sculpt goes, but again, I really wish there was some shading on these. The Obi-Wan boots had some really nice shading on the paint app, and I think it's really missing here on these. I do really like the double stitching that they did on all the seams on the boots. I think that came out really good. There's also some interesting details on the top of the boot here. You have these kind of buckles and flaps, although again, there is no different color applied to them, and there is no texture or peg holes on the bottom of the feet. So now take a look at the articulation on the figure, and it is fairly well done. And he does have a double jointed head and neck, and you can get him to look up quite a bit with just the head joint there, although you can't get him to look down at all, but he does have a good range of motion on the neck itself, so you can get a decent range of motion there up and down. You can get some pivot on the head, which is good. You can get some really nice expressive poses. Full rotation on the head there. The neck also rotates, as you can see. You will have some gaps, though, sometimes, depending on how you position it, which is a little unfortunate, but it does help with the articulation. And it can be a little bit difficult to isolate just the neck and move that by itself, so you do kind of have to move the whole thing. Shoulders are pretty good. You get slightly over straight, and you do have full rotation at the socket. You just have to be careful because the top of the shoulder will rub on the robe. And these are typical Figuarts shoulder joints. You can move them out and in on the socket. You can also rotate it a little bit in the socket itself, so you do have a good amount of movement. He does have an upper bicep cut, but it is very hard to isolate that as well. You really kind of have to pin that shoulder down and move it. It is a stiff joint, but you do have a decent amount of movement there. In the elbows, you can get over 90 degrees, but you have this huge gap here, and that's something they really did a good job in the Obi-Wan figure of hiding, but they just really didn't put the effort in on this one, which is disappointing. The wrists do have full range of motion, typical for all the Figuarts. You have that swivel and peg. The hands really come out easily on this figure, though, I noticed. It's one of the problems that I've had with this. When you're trying to position those wrists, the hand just kind of pops right off there. I don't know if the ball isn't big enough on the peg to really hold it in place, but you do get a decent amount of movement out of it. It's nothing crazy, but it's not bad by any means. While the figure does not have a diaphragm joint, you do have a fairly articulated waist. You can only get a little bit of side-to-side pivot. You do have just about full rotation. You can see the belt is free moving there. And you do have a little bit of backwards. It's really not that much, but you can go a little backwards and a little forwards. The diaphragm would have helped with this, but it probably wouldn't have worked very well with the robe. The hips are actually pretty good on this figure. You can see the ribs do hinder it a little bit, but it's not that bad because it is fairly pliable. You can see you can get a pretty good split there. You also get a really nice kick forward. You're getting over 90 degrees there, which is quite nice. You also have a pretty good kick back on these. You can see it's not amazing, but you're probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 degrees or so. And again, excellent hip joints on here where you can move the leg in and out of the socket, which I really like. It really helps you to get some dynamic leg poses. I get really annoyed when a figure doesn't have that feature. You do have some rotation at the socket there. It's not a huge amount, but it's plenty to get some realistic looking poses. You do have a single jointed knee, and you can get a little bit over 90 degrees. Not a huge amount, but plenty enough to get a nice pose on there. There is only a slight bit of rotation, and you really only have it when you bend the joint. You don't have any straight, and there is no rotation anywhere else on the leg, unfortunately. The figure's got decent ankle joints. They're not the best, they're also not the worst, but the foot only goes down about that far. It goes up a decent amount. You do have full rotation. You also have a bit of a gap at the ankle, which I'm not the biggest fan of. You can get a decent amount of pivot, especially on the outside, but you're hardly getting any at all on the inside, which does hinder wide leg poses. Toes are articulated. You can go up almost 90 degrees and down quite a bit. So now check out the size and scale of the figure, and he does stand at almost exactly 6¼ inches tall, which is a pretty good height for him. And here he is next to the Figuarts Obi-Wan figure. You can see he's definitely a bit taller than him. Not monstrously so, but it's probably fairly accurate, especially to the actor's heights. So overall, I do think this is a pretty awesome figure. I really think it's one of the best Samuel L. Jackson based figures out there, aside from like a Hot Toys. But it does have its issues. Some of the issues are the big gap in the elbow, which I'm not a fan of. They did a much better job in the Obi-Wan. Same thing with the joints. The joints are much bigger and more obtrusive, especially the elbow joint. There's also a lack of shading in a lot of the parts of this figure. And these were things that they had on the Obi-Wan, especially the boots and the belt. So it's a little disappointing to see him move a step backwards in that, but I do love the head sculpt. And overall, I think it's a great figure. It has good articulation, good sculpt, and good paint, but I think Figuarts can definitely do better. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed the review, and as always, please subscribe for more.